The economic expansion of the 1950s and 1960s, the fastest sustained growth in human history across the Western world, was produced by the Bretton Woods system's specific institutional design. Exchange rate stability allowed trade to expand without currency risk. The IMF provided emergency liquidity. The World Bank funded reconstruction. And underneath all of it, a structural contradiction that Robert Triffin identified in 1960 and that Nixon was forced to confront in 1971 was quietly accumulating. France was converting dollars to gold. Fort Knox reserves were declining. The best economic system ever designed was consuming itself from within. The Bretton Woods Conference of July 1944 gathered 44 Allied nations at the Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire, while WWII was still being fought. The architects John Maynard Keynes for Britain, the greatest economist of the 20th century, and Harry Dexter White for America. 3 weeks of negotiation. One foundational design, the dollar convertible to gold at $35 per ounce. Every other currency pegged to the dollar. The IMF to manage balance of payments crises. The World Bank to fund reconstruction. The most ambitious monetary architecture in history, designed specifically to prevent the competitive devaluations and trade wars of the 1930s that had contributed to WWII's conditions. Robert Triffin testified before Congress in 1960 with one of the most consequential economic predictions in history. His argument, the Triffin Dilemma, identified the structural contradiction embedded in any reserve currency system. For the world to have enough dollars to conduct international trade, America must run balance of payments deficits, supplying dollars to the world. But those deficits accumulate as foreign dollar holdings that can be converted to gold. As deficits grow, confidence in dollar-gold convertibility declines. To stop the deficits, America must deflate its economy, destroying the growth that makes the system valuable. The system requires two incompatible things simultaneously. No reserve currency can solve this. The dilemma is structural, not political. De Gaulle's France was the most aggressive exploiter of the Triffin Dilemma. In 1965, de Gaulle held a press conference in which he explicitly attacked the dollar's exorbitant privilege. The specific advantage America derived from issuing the world's reserve currency. France then systematically converted its dollar reserves to gold, dispatching ships to collect gold from the Federal Reserve in New York. Between 1958 and 1971, America's gold reserves fell from approximately $20 billion to approximately $10 billion. The dollars outstanding simultaneously grew. The ratio between outstanding dollars and available gold, the specific measure of Bretton Woods viability, moved steadily toward the crisis point that Nixon reached in August 1971. De Gaulle did not destroy Bretton Woods. He simply used its own mechanism to reveal that it was already unsustainable. By summer 1971, the mathematics of Bretton Woods had become unavoidable. America's gold reserves had fallen to approximately $10 billion. Foreign dollar holdings, all of which could theoretically be presented for gold conversion, exceeded that amount by a factor of several times. Britain's request in early August 1971 to convert $750 million to gold triggered the specific decision crisis. Nixon had two options: defend the gold standard by contracting the American economy to rebuild reserves, or close the gold window and accept the consequences. On August 13th, he summoned 10 senior economic advisors to Camp David. Treasury Secretary John Connally dominated the meeting. The gold window would close. The only question was how. Nixon's August 15th television address, which interrupted Bonanza to announce the suspension of gold convertibility, was framed as a temporary defensive measure against international speculators. The framing was politically successful. The substance was permanent and structural. What Nixon described as a temporary suspension became the defining feature of the global monetary system for the next 50-plus years. The dollar remained the world's reserve currency without gold backing, sustained not by the convertibility promise, but by the network effects of universal dollar use in trade. The petrodollar arrangement Kissinger negotiated with Saudi Arabia in 1974, and the specific institutional inertia of a global financial system built around dollar denomination. The temporary measure became the permanent architecture. The architecture has never been replaced. The petrodollar arrangement negotiated by Henry Kissinger and the Saudi government between 1972 and 1974 was the specific institutional mechanism that replaced gold as the dollar's structural anchor. Saudi Arabia agreed to price all oil sales exclusively in dollars and to invest surplus oil revenues in U.S. Treasury bonds. In exchange, American security, guarantees, and military equipment. The arrangement meant that any country needing to buy oil, every industrial economy, needed to hold dollars. The demand for dollars to purchase oil created permanent structural demand for the currency, regardless of gold backing. Nixon had ended the gold standard. Kissinger replaced it with oil. The dollar had a new anchor. In many respects, it was more powerful than gold, because oil was consumed daily rather than sitting in vaults. The floating exchange rate system that replaced Bretton Woods fixed rates, formalized at the Jamaica Accords of 1976, created the specific financial architecture that made the subsequent economic turning points in this series possible. Floating exchange rates meant that trade imbalances could be adjusted through currency movements, rather than gold flows, enabling the global trade expansion that the container revolution accelerated. They also enabled the specific currency speculation and crisis dynamics that produced the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The financial complexity of a floating rate world created the derivatives markets that amplified the 2008 crisis. Every economic turning point in this series is downstream of the 1971 decision to float. This episode is the series' foundational turning point because every subsequent turn happened in the world that Nixon's weekend created. The Bretton Woods system's human achievement. The greatest economic expansion in history is documented in specific material improvements in living standards across the Western world from 1945 to 1971. American median family income in real terms more than doubled. European countries that had been devastated by 2 world wars rebuilt their industrial bases, created welfare states, and achieved living standards that exceeded anything in their histories. Japan transformed from a defeated military state into the world's second-largest economy. The specific institutional mechanism, exchange rate stability, enabled businesses to plan cross-border investment without currency risk, enabling the specific trade expansion that produced the growth. Bretton Woods gave the global economy 26 years of the most productive stability it had ever experienced. The Bretton Woods system's specific distributional failure, the one that produced de Gaulle's exorbitant privilege critique, was that it gave America unique advantages that accumulated over time at other countries' expense. America could run deficits and export them as dollar reserves without paying the adjustment costs that any other country would face. The dollar's reserve status meant that American consumers could purchase imports at suppressed prices, American companies could invest abroad at favorable exchange rates, and American government could borrow at lower interest rates than any competitor. The system's extraordinary success in producing global growth came with a specific distributional asymmetry. The growth was broadly shared, but the monetary privilege was exclusively American. That asymmetry produced de Gaulle's gold conversions and ultimately forced Nixon's hand. The Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, where the 1944 conference took place, is one of the most historically significant hotel buildings in the world. The hotel, a Spanish Renaissance structure built in 1902, set against the White Mountains of New Hampshire, the presidential range visible behind it. The specific extraordinary setting, a grand resort hotel in the New England mountains where the post-war global economy was designed. The hotel still operates. The Gold Room, where the Commission on Monetary Policy met, can be visited. The specific room where Keynes and White negotiated the dollar-gold parity is a hotel conference room available for meetings. The most consequential monetary decisions in modern history were made in a building you can stay in tonight. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the 2 institutions created at Bretton Woods and still operating in 2026, are the most durable institutional legacy of the conference. Their headquarters both in Washington 600, a few blocks from the White House, a deliberate choice reflecting America's institutional centrality to the post-war order. The IMF's 190 member countries make it effectively the world's monetary institution of last resort, providing emergency loans during balance of payments, crises from Mexico in 1994 to Greece in 2010 to Pakistan in 2023. The World Bank has lent approximately $700 billion to development projects across the developing world. Both institutions are periodically contested for their conditionality requirements, their governance structure that gives America effective veto power, and their specific representation of a 1944 world order in 2026 circumstances. Both continue operating. Bretton Woods' collapse in 1971 is the Economic Turning Point series' foundational episode, because every subsequent turning point in this series happened in the world that Nixon's weekend created. The floating exchange rate world enabled the container revolution's global trade expansion. Episode 2, because floating rates allow trade imbalances to be absorbed through currency adjustment, rather than deflation. The 1997 Asian Financial Crisis, Episode 4, was produced by the specific dynamics of countries maintaining dollar pegs in a floating rate world. The 2008 Financial Crisis, Episode 6, was funded by the Treasury bond market that replaced gold as the global safe asset. The Bitcoin White Paper, Episode 7, was written specifically as a response to the trust-based monetary system that Nixon's gold window closure made permanent. The series' entire architecture is downstream of 1971. The specific lesson that Bretton Woods teaches, and that the Economic Turning Point series will trace across 7 episodes, is that the most consequential economic turning points are not the crises. They are the design decisions that make crises possible. Bretton Woods' collapse in 1971 was not a turning point. The turning point was the specific design decision made in 1944, creating a reserve currency system with the Triffin Dilemma embedded in it. Nixon's 1971 decision was the consequence of a 1944 design choice. The container ship's 1956 invention was a design choice whose economic consequences took decades to fully manifest. The Green Revolution's specific agricultural technology was a design choice whose food security consequences are still compounding. The series traces design choices, not just their consequences. The Bretton Woods system's specific trajectory, designed with genius, operating with extraordinary success, containing a structural flaw that made its eventual failure inevitable, and being replaced by an architecture that was more powerful than what it replaced, is the Economic Turning Point series' founding pattern. Great economic designs do not fail because they are bad. They fail because they succeed so completely that they generate the conditions that make their specific design obsolete. Bretton Woods succeeded so completely at providing dollar liquidity to the world that it made its own gold backing untenable. The success consumed the design. The replacement was not a retreat. It was an evolution, producing a dollar system more durable and more globally embedded than the gold-backed version had ever been. 22 days in a New Hampshire hotel, 26 years of the greatest economic expansion in history. 1 weekend at Camp David, 55 years of dollar dominance without gold backing. The Triffin Dilemma, identified in 1960, confirmed in 1971, still operating in 2026. The series' Economic Turning Points continues next episode, with the story of the metal box that globalized the world. In 1956, a trucking entrepreneur named Malcolm McLean put 58 containers on a converted tanker ship in Newark, New Jersey, and changed the economics of global trade more fundamentally than any policy decision in this series. The container ship reduced the cost of shipping a ton of cargo by 97%. It made the global supply chain possible. It connected the factories of Asia to the consumers of America and Europe with a mechanical precision that no trade agreement could have achieved alone. Episode 2 is the most underreported economic revolution of the 20th century. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. Economic Turning Points has begun. The foundational design is in place. The subsequent episodes trace what the design made possible and what it made inevitable.